Okay. Welcome, everybody. Today we have a hopefully an interesting topic. We're going to cover the stock market. That's where we're going to start out. Then we're going to shift over to Greenland, and then we're going to talk about Venezuela a little bit. So, aside from Greenland, which really is the number one concern, but after Greenland, the top concern that investors on Wall Street have been discussing for months is, are we in a bubble? And I want to make it clear right from the outset, I am not concerned that we are in a bubble. And one of the big reasons why I'm not concerned with a bubble, if you just leave aside PE ratios and stock market valuations, we live in a very, very chaotic world. And we've been living in a chaotic world for over 5 years. And it's very difficult for investors to get too ecstatic about the economy or about the stock market when they're always worried about the next crisis that's about to erupt. So I want to look at some recent history and cover all of the chaos that you're all very well aware of. But investors seem to forget. And again, the reason why this history of chaos is important is it's a good reminder that bubbles never occur when there is so much worry out there, so much concern that we're on the verge of a crisis. And we've been living with this attitude that we're on the verge of a crisis since 2020. What happened in 2020? We all know we had a COVID crisis and the global economy shut down, right? Not just in the United States, but pretty much every country in the world closed the doors of businesses, and the world essentially came to a standstill. And as a consequence of that, we had a monster recession that only lasted for a couple quarters. But during that monster recession, we saw GDP in the United States drop by something like close to 40%. And the stock market during this time period, the S&P 500, also declined by over 30%. So again, people were concerned about a bubble going into COVID. We came out of COVID and the stock market recovered very sharply. It was a V-shaped recovery. Everybody thought that a V-shaped recovery was impossible, but that's exactly what we have. We had a V-shaped recovery, not only in the stock market, but in the economy as well. Well, that brought us to 2021 and 2022, where in large part as a result of COVID, in large part as a result of big government spending and all kinds of shortages, we confronted a huge inflation, the largest inflation since the United States has had since the late 1970s, early 1980s. And as a result of that inflation, the Fed raised interest rates aggressively. Again, it was the most aggressive interest rate hiking cycle that we had since the 1980s under Paul Volcker, who was chairman of the Fed in the 80s. That combination of high inflation and very aggressive interest rate hikes led to profound concern that we were going to confront a deep recession. So not only would we have inflation, but we'd have recession as well. And that meant stagflation, which means an economy that is either declining or not growing, combined with high inflation. So we had inflation concerns, recession concerns, stagflation concerns. Now, none of those fears materialized, right? They just remained in fear. but we never actually had a recession. We never had stagflation. And even though prices remained high, inflation gradually came down. And the stock market, while declining by 20, close to 20% in 2022, we had a very rapid recovery that began in late 2022. And that recovery led to new high after new high after new high. And if you look at the last year and a half of the Biden administration and the first year of the Trump administration, we've had well over 100 new highs in the S&P 500 despite all of these worries and concerns. Now, in the midst of these economic worries and problems, we had Russia invade Ukraine, right? That happened on February 24th of 2022, this invasion, and that led to a big spike in the price of oil. A big spike in the price of oil. And that price spike led to even more concerns that inflation would skyrocket even further. And high oil prices, of course, oil is an incredibly important input for businesses and households. So again, this fueled inflation concerns, recession concerns, stagflation concerns. Okay, again, those fears remained in fear, and the economy and the stock market chugged along. That brings us to October of 2023, when Hamas invades Israel, murders 1,200 Israelis, kidnaps over 50 others, and the world is frozen. And all we hear from geopolitical experts, people on Wall Street, we are headed towards World War III. This concern of World War III lasted months and months and months. And in fact, it really never went away, even up to June of 2024. Now we're moving into 2024. And this is the 12-day war between Iran and Israel. Again, calls for World War III, that thousands and thousands of American soldiers would be killed. So all through this period, we had economic concerns, which consisted of recession, inflation, major war concerns, perhaps even another world war. But the market trudged along. Again, I'm giving this history, which you all know, but to make the case that when you have such worries, such concerns, this is not a global macro environment that is conducive for excessive risk taking and bubble formation in asset prices. That brings us to last year. In February of 2025, Trump began to speak very, very seriously about tariffs. It became his primary policy objective. Now, we all know that investors are terrified of tariffs. And when it became crystal clear that Trump was not backing down, the stock market last year began to plummet. And then finally came Liberation Day in early April of 25. And by the time Liberation Day was announced, the tariffs were announced, the S&P 500 had dropped by nearly 20%. If there was a stock market bubble, it surely would have burst during this period. Investors were pulling their money out of the stock market. Everyone was hunkering down, but the decline ended there. The minute that negotiations began and it became clear to investors that Trump wouldn't go through with the worst of the tariffs, that he would pull back a bit and moderate, the stock market began to take off. And again, we went on to set new highs. During this time period, we had a trade war, not only with the entire world, but with our largest trading partner in the world, which is China. And that trade war persists to this day. Yes, we're going through negotiations. Trump is due to visit China in April, but the trade war is not over. And if we were in a stock market bubble, again, there are plenty of reasons for this bubble to burst. This brings us to the present day, where we have huge uprisings in Iran. We seem to be on the verge of major military strikes, perhaps to take out the Iranian regime. So war concerns are back on the front burner. And in addition to all this, we have Trump threatening the independence of the Fed, the Department of Justice making going after Jay Powell, the chair of the Fed, launching a criminal investigation. And now we have Trump saying he wants Greenland and threatening very high tariffs once again. And yes, the stock market is under some pressure. Yes, yesterday on Tuesday, the stock market, the S&P 500 was down 2%. Yes, this morning we are struggling to hang on to gains, but there are no signs of a bubble bursting. Because when you have such a chaotic global macro backdrop, bubbles are not formed. So that's how I wanted to begin, taking on this idea that we're in a bubble. These worries resurface. Commentators bring it up over and over again. And I just want to sort of dismiss it and remove those concerns right off the bat. Now let's pivot to the subject of the day, which is Greenland. What is going on? Well, first, it's important for us to be clear-eyed about Greenland's strategic importance, right? Everyone is focused on Trump's tactics, his aggressive approach. But first, let's make the basic point that the territory is key for the security of the Arctic, for transatlantic defense. When I say transatlantic, I mean European and US defense. And it's key to counter Russian and Chinese influence. And of course, we all know that Greenland and its resources, which include rare earth materials, could be more secure if it's under direct US control rather than being under Danish and European control. Now, just yesterday, I heard the president of Azerbaijan speaking, and he said something very wise. By the way, the president of Azerbaijan, he's probably one of the top 2 or 3 most attuned leaders in the world to international risk, geopolitical risk. He's a very wise individual. I'm going to quote him. He said, international relations are governed not by the rule of law, but by the rule of strength. Now, this is a fact. And to deny this fact, I believe, is to live in a world of make-believe. To live in a world that's detached from reality. Nevertheless, the issue of Greenland and who controls Greenland, who has more influence over Greenland, it's clearly an issue suited to diplomacy and not to threats against the territory of a close NATO ally of the United States. Denmark, which today has ownership over Greenland, has been a reliable U.S. security partner for decades. And Denmark, along with the other NATO countries, has contributed to American security over many decades and through many wars. Serious allies resolve strategic questions through negotiation and partnership. If we're going to talk about coercive action, it's worth asking the question, why is this coercive rhetoric aimed at loyal allies like Europe and Denmark, rather than at states like Qatar and Turkey, who host U.S. air bases, but at the same time, Qatar and Turkey are backing Islamic extremists. And in doing so, Turkey and Qatar threaten our security and our way of life. In other words, Trump threatens punitive actions against our allies like France, Germany, Denmark, the United Kingdom, and others. And he treats the funders and backers of terrorists like Turkey and Qatar with kindness. Anyway, as it relates to Greenland and why Trump takes the approach, the aggressive approach that he takes, you have to read his book, The Art of the Deal. And you can see it in real life, but if you read The Art of the Deal, you see it in his own words. Trump is using his standard playbook on Greenland. Okay. First, Trump aims high. He sets the bar very high in order to anchor the negotiation. So he's saying, I want Greenland. I want Greenland. He could have said, let's cooperate in the Arctic. No, he says he wants everything. That's anchoring the negotiation according to his preferences at the most extreme level. I want it, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Second, when he aims so high with very punitive threats, right? Very punitive threats, he aims to create leverage. So Trump demands total control. And if you don't acquiesce to Trump's demands, Trump is saying you will pay a very high price. Okay? He's saying we want total access to Arctic shipping, to rare earth materials, to missile defense. Rather than saying we'd like access, Trump says we're going to have total access. We are going to obtain total control, right? This is all about establishing leverage. Number three, Trump seeks to control the psychology in this negotiation by taking an aggressive initiative, a fiercely aggressive initiative. He forces the other side to react. And yes, everyone calls him crazy. They call him chaotic. They call him a madman. But that's part of his strategy. He's attempting to create chaos and fear. And then later, he will accept negotiation. But in his mind, he will achieve a negotiated outcome on better terms than he would have achieved otherwise. So that's his approach. That's the way Trump negotiates. Now, finally, Trump is willing, at least he appears willing to walk away. He can walk away and impose stiff penalties on those he's negotiating with. And power, in Trump's mind, ultimately comes from not needing the deal. And he's willing to even himself pay a high price. He's going to impose a high price on those he's negotiating with, and he's even willing to pay a high price for himself. And the price that Trump is willing to pay is economic and financial damage for the United States, right? We've seen it time and time again. He was willing for the stock market to decline by 20% between February and April of last year. He was willing to see the US dollar fall hard yesterday, the stock market to fall hard yesterday, and for bond yields to sell off sharply, to rise sharply. He's willing to go down that path. Now, there are a few open questions that we can't answer yet. Will a deal actually get done? Right? That's an unknown. Second, how much lasting damage has Trump done to the relationship between the United States and our NATO allies? Because through the whole negotiating process of last year, and now these antics over Greenland, a level of trust must have been damaged. Number three, could Trump have secured the same or even better terms without all of this friction and damage? In my view, the answer is probably yes. Now, this strategy, Trump's strategy, again, which he writes about in The Art of the Deal, it's probably quite effective when you're in a closed room negotiating a real estate deal. But when you're the president of a country and you're inflicting damage on the entire US economy and the financial assets of an entire population, Americans, right, who you represent. Yes, Trump, you may have won the election, but voters did not vote for this type of chaos. In fact, I think they voted for just the opposite. They voted for a return to normalcy after the chaos and mismanagement of the Biden administration. Now, I think Trump understands this. And I don't think he's willing to put the economy through the same type of turmoil that he put it through last year. So this time around, I suspect cooler heads will prevail sooner rather than later. But I also think all this chaos was probably unnecessary. But chaos is always Trump's default strategy. He obviously knows of no other way. But the bottom line is, I do believe we're going to see a transition to negotiations because more tariffs will inflict a lot of damage. And it may be that the US economy suffers even more than the European economy from these tariffs. You know, it's interesting that last year, the European stock markets, many of them actually, performed better than the US stock market. And if you look at inflation rates, relative inflation rates, Europe did not suffer as high of inflation as the United States did. It seems that the US was more damaged by the tariffs than Europe was. And I do think, even though the US policymakers would never admit that out loud, I suspect they know it. Now, yesterday, Trump's Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, who is a key person in the Trump administration when it comes to these tariffs and economic policy, and he's a hardliner, right? He's a big advocate, or he had been last year, of tariffs. Well, he spoke yesterday on CNBC, and in the interview, he said clearly, nobody wants more tariffs. He said the Europeans are our friends, and this will work out. Now, this is not how Lutnick used to speak about tariffs in 2025. He used to say how great they were for the US economy, that they would build US industry, that they would create jobs. And he'll still claim that about the tariffs that were implemented in 2025. He won't back down on the merits of those tariffs. But he seems to have no inclination, no desire to impose new tariffs in 2026. Instead, he's saying we don't want tariffs. We don't want new tariffs. We want to work this out. We want to figure out a good arrangement on Greenland that is in our best interests, that's in Denmark's best interests, that's in Greenland's best interests, and that's in Europe's best interests. That's our goal. So the language of key people in the Trump administration has evolved. Now, part of this may be due to clear indications that Republicans are getting fed up with all of the chaos and drama. Okay, this became clear in the last couple of weeks when we had a lot of pushback from key Republicans in the Senate that they aren't very happy about Trump going after Jay Powell and the Fed. No doubt Republicans are not thrilled about Trump threatening a NATO ally, Denmark and Greenland, with military force, right? That's not something too many Republicans like to see. They've got elections coming up in November of this year, and this type of chaos doesn't do very well in at election time, and the polling data is making that crystal clear. I've heard that people within the Republican Party over the past few months, uh, in private conversations, they've been saying that they're deeply frustrated with the White House and even with the president himself because of all the chaos. And I have no doubt that unless these negotiations over Greenland take a cooler tone, a calmer tone, Trump is going to face a big backlash from his own party, and he will get a mouthful from many of the people in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. So this too may be a reason for why not only the financial markets taking a dip, but also the disgruntlement in within Trump's own party. So this brings us to Trump's speech that he delivered today in Davos, Switzerland. He gave it at 8:30 a.m. this morning, and it was a long, rambling speech. But from the standpoint of the financial markets, all that mattered was what Trump would say about Greenland. As it turned out, he said only one thing that mattered to the market. And he also didn't say something. And what he didn't say was also important for financial markets. But first, let's talk about the one important thing that he said. He said, and I quote, "We won't use force to acquire Greenland." End of quote. It was important because until now, Trump has threatened the use of military force. And it's not that many people took the threat literally, but saying that he would use military force if necessary reflects a level of hostility that, quite frankly, is dangerous. And the market perceived that danger. So when Trump said this morning that we won't use force, he throttled back on the level of hostility. And that was a relief to investors. Now, let's turn to what he didn't say. Trump, in his speech, didn't mention his threat of new tariffs on Europe if they don't give him Greenland, right? He's been threatening tariffs since Saturday. And today, he didn't mention it. That omission had to have been intentional. And instead of the tariff threat, he said, and I'm going to quote, "You can say yes, meaning you can say yes to handing Greenland over to us, and we will be very appreciative. Or you can say no, and we will remember. End of quote. Okay. So he is making it clear that he will see it as a major problem if at the end of the day, Europe doesn't acquiesce, but he didn't mention tariffs. So, yes, Trump wants Greenland, but it also seems now that he's less interested in a nasty fight and he's less interested in tariffs that will crash the stock market and do damage to the economy. Now, before we conclude on Greenland, I want to touch on two other topics as it relates to Greenland. Trump said something else that was true and perhaps explains his attitude toward Greenland. He said, if Europe were attacked, we, the United States, would come to their rescue, as we've done in the past. But what if we, the United States, were attacked? Would the NATO countries, would the European countries come to our defense? I'm not so sure, he said. And Trump has a point. Why does Trump have a point? Because at the UN Security Council, Europe often does not vote with the United States. In fact, they consistently vote against our most vital interests when it comes to the Middle East and Israel. So, have our NATO allies been reliable? Far from it. So, is Trump wrong to have some level of distrust for Europe? Trump's other point that he hinted at are Europe's demographics. He said Europe is losing its identity, its culture. He said that there are certain parts of Europe that you can't enter because it's just too dangerous, right? Certain cities, certain areas, it's too dangerous. Now, he didn't say it outright, but he was implying that these areas that are too dangerous to enter are now controlled by Islamists. Now, he didn't discuss Europe's future, what Europe might look like 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 30 years from now, but he hinted. Will Europe be Europe in 15, 20, 30 years? Or will it look completely different with enormous segments of Muslim populations that are quite radical? So, yes, we have written agreements with NATO, with Denmark, that we can have a military base in Greenland and we can increase the size of our military assets in Greenland in order to protect it. But in 15 years and 30 years, will those agreements be binding? Or will they be overturned, ignored, because Europe's population looks very different from what it looked like 20 years ago or in the 50s when these agreements were signed? Europe looks nothing today like it did in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Completely different. In another 15 to 30 years, what's Europe going to look like? So, yes, Trump has a point. We may dislike Trump's tactics, his antics, his style on these matters, but the substance of his arguments have merit. Okay, let's move on to Venezuela. But as a segue to Venezuela, I want to take a look at a letter that Trump sent to the Prime Minister of Norway because it is very telling. and it applies to Venezuela indirectly. I'm going to read you the letter. Dear Jonas, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America. Denmark cannot protect that land from Russia or China. And why do they have a right of ownership anyway? There are no written documents. By the way, there are written documents, as an aside. It's only that a boat landed there hundreds of years ago, but we had boats landing there also. I have done more for NATO than any other person since its founding, and now NATO should do something for the United States. Okay, the letter goes on. The world is not secure unless we have complete and total control of Greenland. Thank you, President uh, Donald John Trump. The point of the letter that I wanted to share with you goes back to the beginning, where he seems to be very offended that he didn't win the Nobel Peace Prize. And since you didn't give me the Nobel Peace Prize, you don't think I'm a man of peace, even though I've stopped all these wars. I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace. So Trump is upset, and he's telling the Prime Minister of Norway that this is impacting my approach to you now when it comes to Greenland. You don't think I'm a man of peace? Okay. You're going to get what you want. I don't have to be a man of peace. So, how's that relevant to Venezuela? The leader of Venezuela, and I would argue the true leader of Venezuela, Maria Corina Machado, gave her Nobel Prize medal away to Trump when she met him last week in the White House. Now, she was heavily criticized for giving Trump her medal. She was criticized by the Nobel Committee, and she was criticized by many other people in the media, intellectuals. And the criticism was that she has no self-respect. She's just appeasing Trump. She's afraid. She's a coward. She's you know, bowing down to the king. And her behavior is not impressive, not fit for a leader. Well, first, let me just say Maria Corina Machado is one of the most courageous politicians in the world. She has been openly confronting the Venezuelan dictatorship since 2000. She has stood up to two dangerous dictators, Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, putting her life at risk. She has organized the Venezuelan opposition for elections while her life was under threat as she was doing so. She put together an organization that was capable of counting the votes back in 2024, counting them accurately so she could present the real accurate results, not only to the Venezuelan people, but also to the world. And it's only because of her that the world knows the real results of the election of July of 2024. Okay. So this is no coward. This is a brave woman. She snuck out of Venezuela in order to receive the Nobel Prize in Norway. There's a lot of information about the way she snuck out, and it is astonishing. And she put her life at risk. The Venezuelan military, the Cuban spy network, the paramilitary groups in Venezuela were all after her. They wanted to assassinate her. And she had to engage in some incredibly risky maneuvers to get out of Venezuela. Was she escaping Venezuela to save her life? No, that's not why she was escaping Venezuela. She was escaping Venezuela because she believed it was important for her to receive the Nobel Prize. Why? not because she cares about the honor or the medal for herself. She has dedicated her life to the Venezuelan people, trying to restore democracy for the people of Venezuela. So, why did she give her Nobel medal to Trump? She could care less about medals. She's not in this for herself, for her pride, for her ego, for self gain, for self promotion. She is doing everything she possibly can to liberate her people from an oppressive dictatorship. And what a brilliant move it turned out to be to give this medal to Trump. And we can see it in this letter that Trump wrote to the Prime Minister of Norway. He is very upset with Norway. Why? Because the prize is given in Norway. That's where it's given. Can you imagine if Maria Corina Machado did not give her medal to Trump? Okay, now he likes her. He had never met her before. Now he likes her. He's very impressed with her. And he's mentioned it every time he speaks about her. He mentions that she gave him her Nobel. Now, this is very important if Venezuela is going to get its democracy back. Very, very important. If Trump doesn't like the leader of the opposition, he's going to care less about restoring democracy to Venezuela, or at least it's going to be moved way down in his priority list. So for him to take a liking to her and to think she's a great person, that is critically important. And now in hindsight, we can see the brilliance of her gift to Trump. On Monday of this week, right, on Martin Luther King Day, Trump he retweeted the following tweet from a reporter named Mark Thiessen. Trump's tweet was this. What he retweeted was this. I predict Trump will visit a free Iran, a free Havana. Havana, of course, is the capital of Cuba, and a free Caracas before he leaves office. Caracas, of course, is the capital of Venezuela. Okay, Trump retweeted that. A free Iran, a free Havana, a free Caracas. If she didn't give him that medal, maybe Caracas and Havana would have been left out of that tweet. Maybe it would have just been a free Iran. Now, the question is, will Venezuela become a democracy? And this is an open question right now. Many analysts are arguing, and when I say analysts, I mean people who have some expertise when it comes to Venezuela. Many people argue that Trump could care less about restoring democracy to Venezuela. He just wants a cozy relationship with this new dictatorship. And as long as he can control them, he will be happy to leave this dictatorship in place. He just wants a lot of leverage. Now he has a lot of leverage. He can push them around. He can get their oil. He can get the Cubans, the Iranians, the Russians, and the Chinese out of Venezuela, and he can control it. So he's happy with the current situation, and he will be happy indefinitely. So does this make sense? I think no. I think it doesn't make sense. I think what Trump is doing, and we've discussed this a bit in the past, but I want to flesh it out a little bit more. Trump right now is just trying to achieve stability, right? He does not want a political meltdown. So he is giving support to the regime in exchange for them selling the United States oil. And for now, he doesn't want to rock the boat very much. He needs time to gain leverage to penetrate this regime. And at some point, he's going to ask, in my opinion, for them to prepare the groundwork for elections. But that's coming. That's coming in a matter of months. He'll begin to insist on some changes to create the framework for a free and fair election in Venezuela. Now, why am I convinced that he's going to do this? Well, can you imagine the following situation? Imagine a year from now, there's been no changes, and Delcy Rodriguez is still the dictator of Venezuela with no sign of an election to come. Venezuela has a long history. When I say long, it goes back a good 25 years of people, Venezuelans taking to the streets en masse, rising up against this dictatorship, demanding elections. And the only way this dictatorship has restored order was by doing exactly what we've seen in Iran, opening up fire on the protesters, murdering them, imprisoning them. Can you imagine a situation where Trump is backing a dictatorship and the people are rising up in the streets calling for free elections, and Trump is in a situation where he's backing the dictator? Right? Not a good place to be for the United States. And you can be sure the Venezuelan people will rise up again if this situation goes on for too long. They're thrilled with Trump right now, but a year from now, if there's no change, they will not be very thrilled with Trump. And Trump likes to be a popular guy. He loves to be a popular guy everywhere in the world. And right now, he's very popular with the Venezuelan people. And he does not want to be in a position again of backing a repressive government that is gunning protesters down in the streets. So that's reason number one. Second reason is Trump wants to be seen as a good actor on the global stage. He doesn't want to be another China or another Russia. And if all we've done is take control of a dictatorship, an awful dictatorship that's hated by the population, and we are just bullying a dictatorship, making it do what we want, and it's repressing the people, we are going to be seen as a bad actor, no different than China or Russia. So those are two related reasons, but both very important. And even if Trump isn't forward thinking, you can be sure Marco Rubio is. And if Marco Rubio hasn't explained these ideas to Trump yet, he will be soon enough. Okay. So just to conclude on all three topics that we've discovered, the bubble, Greenland, and now Venezuela, we are living amidst a lot of chaos, a lot of uncertainty. But fortunately, we have a very strong economy that is capable of weathering tremendous uncertainty, as we've seen really since 2000, since 2020. We've had a tremendous amount of chaos, and our economy has managed to continue to chug along. Our corporate sector is rock solid. Our banking system is rock solid. And ultimately, in terms of the way Trump is dealing with Greenland, I think we had a pretty good hint yesterday from Howard Lutnick, his Commerce Secretary, and then today from Trump himself, that ultimately the final outcome may not be as bad as many people fear. And actually, maybe we're going to get some decent results along the way with a negotiated outcome to this apparent chaos. All right. Let's see if there's any comments or questions.